All right. I guess I'll deal a bit more with. You went off into a bunch of other topics as you usually do, instead of dealing with the one topic that I'm trying to address. You mentioned this, and I do believe it's important because you mentioned one of the topics in your very first audio presentation. And I guess I'm not going to go on talking for a long time. I want to stick to this one topic of Revelation 18. I'll ask you a question. Maybe you can answer it quickly because it's a very simple question. Can you show me one instance in Revelation 18, since you're making the logical connect, which I believe is logical, that this is a false church that is being referred to? Can you mention one instance in Revelation 18 where the biblical term ecclesia is used for church?
Well, the term isn't necessarily used, but just like the term Trinity isn't used in the Bible, the reality is there. It's indicated clearly because it's contrasted with the bride of Christ. And that's why throughout the Old Testament, God refers to his people when they would fall into apostasy and separate from his true worship as a whore. Okay, so the biblical imagery is obvious, that it's clearly contrasting this, the true church, the faithful bride, to this counter church that has fallen into apostasy and become a whore in the city of Seven Hills. Okay? And in fact, Pope Benedict XIV, addressing in an address on May 5th, 1749, a true pope, he spoke of Rome, and he spoke of how what was once the earthly Babylon has been transformed into a new heavenly city. Okay, it's now become the resting place of the martyrs. And so he speaks of how it was pagan Rome was considered Babylon, okay, spiritually, and it's become Christian. But in the last days, it will give way to apostasy. And so you have papal authority here confirming that when it talks about Babylon, it's talking about the city of Rome. And we have Our Lady of La Salette who said Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. We have Jesus who says in Matthew chapter 24:15 that the abomination of desolation will be in the holy place. We have St. Paul who says that the man of sin will sit in the temple of God, and that there will be a great apostasy. And so we have a spiritual deception that's predicted. The doctors of the church teach that the Mass will be taken away in the final days. Okay, and so we've had anti-popes in church history. We had a horrible crisis in the Great Western Schism. And if those don't constitute the great apostasy, okay, with the great spiritual deception reserved for the end, what will that be? And that's what we see right now. And all you have to do is believe in Catholic teaching and look around. We've got Benedict XVI praising the leaders of false religions. He's not a Catholic.
Okay, it's been 2 minutes, right?
What's that?
Oh, we're doing the 2-minute thing, right?
Well, go ahead. You can respond.
I'll respond by saying I gather you can't, once again, we're off into a bunch of different topics. You can't show me one passage from the term.
Well, let me cut you up, and then you can do. Veering off into a bunch of different, we are debating the issue of whether they're popes, so when I bring up what they do, that is quite relevant, but go ahead.
Okay, I would agree it is quite relevant. I don't agree it's relevant to veer off into different topics. I think we're dealing with Revelation 18. I think that if you present that as one of your proofs that we are in a false church, I think you've got to prove that. I can notice that you can't deal with this term. You make the logical disconnect that the city of Rome, which you're interpreting this as the city of Rome, you're then connecting it to a false church. There's nowhere any mention of any church here. And I'll ask you one more question. Suppose you can go out. It'd be nice if you could respond to it specifically instead of going on into other terms. It's a really simple question. Is there any place in all of the scriptures where reference is being made to a church or churches and the term ecclesia is absent from the biblical text?
I didn't hear what you said at the end.
Okay. Is there any place in the Bible where a reference is being made to a church or churches and the term ecclesia is absent from the biblical text?
There might be. I'd have to study that issue. What's your point?
Okay. The point is, in other words, you're reading the Revelation 18 what you want to.
No, the fact that the term isn't.
Can I finish?
You asked me a question, okay, and so I'm responding. Yeah, and so the fact that the term isn't mentioned doesn't prove the reality isn't there. Just like the term Trinity isn't mentioned, the term papacy isn't mentioned, but the reality of the papal office is there. The reality of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost is there. Okay, just because the term church isn't mentioned in reference to the great harlot who is contrasted with the bride of Christ, and St. Paul describes the church as the bride. Okay, so it follows logically to anyone who's not in a complete spiritual fog that the great harlot would be a counter-bride, a counter-church. So... And furthermore, you said that this is one of proofs. This is just supporting information. This is just extra information for people to consider that, yes, this explains why we're seeing this. I don't need to quote that and give my opinion on the great harlot to prove the point. Their heresies prove the point. The fact that Benedict XVI says Protestantism is not even heresy. Okay, did you know he says that?
But you've gone on and on. I wasn't able to finish my sentence. I'd like to respond to what you were saying.
Okay.
I can tell that you keep using the argument of the Trinity because you simply don't understand this passage. And I understand why you would use that argument. I hear that argument brought up a lot by Protestants. A lot of individuals in Protestantism, they simply don't have an answer to a passage. And I do believe this passage is very relevant and quite different from the term Trinity. We can find the Trinity everywhere in the Bible, present throughout the whole Bible. The doctrine of the Trinity is there explicitly, whereas we don't have the term mentioned. It is explicit. But the clear difference here is that each time we find a reference, we find the term ecclesia present in the text, and it isn't present here. You can do a little search of that if you want later. This is relevant because you've used this passage a number of times in your audio presentations, and you're making the connection that this, you're connecting a church here, you're connecting the city which you interpret as being Rome to being a false church, and then you're also making the interpretation that this is in reference to the last days. I mean, I don't understand how you can make any of these connections. Where does the text even imply that this is referring to the last days?
Do you believe that the apocalypse pertains to the last days?
Some of it, absolutely.
Okay. There you go. And so, therefore, therefore, it's a very reasonable opinion to believe that things which are said of in the Apocalypse, in Revelation 18, it speaks of Babylon falling. It has fallen. Okay, speaking of something that will happen, that it's applying to the last days. But again, we don't even need this. I mean, your opinion is, here's a question for you. Does the reference to the bride of Christ, okay, the woman, do you believe? Well, I mean, it's just pointless to continue on this issue. Now, you asked me a question about Revelation 18. I can ask you a question now?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
I guess we'll do that. We'll flip-flop asking questions.
Sure. Okay.